Hello. I figured that I could just do a sort of quick video of me trying to play GTA 5 with my new Intel Arc card. Because I have to say that I actually recently got the new GPU, and so far the performance has been a very, very big mess. Like, some games run fine, okay? I guess indie titles or like more recent games, but then there are some like War Thunder or GTA that on average have frame rates that would seem fine, but then something happens along the way and all of a sudden there's like stutters. And I largely think that the problem is caused by the ReBAR system, like resizable bar, which changes how the CPU and GPU can communicate with one another. And the problem there is that you need both the sort of new GPU, which I do have, and a CPU that also is capable of taking advantage of that like new technology. Because in my motherboard, I don't even have the option to enable ReBAR, which means that I guess the data is chunked in smaller bits. And for whatever reason with my old RX 580 that wasn't the problem, but with the new Intel Arc it is. And the stutters are so bad that even if I record at like 30 FPS, they will still be noticeable. And so like the thing is that I know that some people stream at 60 and some people record at 60, and that's pretty cool. For the longest time ever I just did 30 because it is more stable that way. However, with my old RX 580, you know, like an AMD card from 2018, I had sort of low frame rates, well, relatively so, close to 60 in most games, maybe a bit under in some. But at least whatever frame rates I had were stable. Whereas with Intel Arc, I don't really get that. I just find myself struggling because every few seconds there's like a hang up and the game just freezes. You can look at the frame graph yourself, which is the frame rate in this case, and you can see that it's not consistent. It is the furthest thing away imaginable from a consistent frame rate. And it says like, oh hey, you know, it is 60, but no. Even 40, even 30, if stable, would feel better than this. Now, why am I crying about this? The idea was that I would get an Intel Arc card and hope that they're gonna patch things out with the drivers. I even did a little bit of research beforehand, and it said that with BIOS updates, even first generation Ryzen CPUs, which is what I have, a Ryzen 7 1700, so 8 cores, 16 threads, pretty good, slightly overclocked. It said that even those CPUs will have like support for ReBAR. And I updated BIOS, and that was a lie. They do not. Now, look, now the frame rate is how it should be. Except, no, it really isn't. I look around, and still, there are stutters. There's like nothing going on, and boom, all of a sudden, it's kind of cursed. And I don't know what's up here. Like, the VRAM is pretty close to being full, but it's not even over 80%, so it should be fine, surely. And the CPU is just vibing. The CPU isn't even breaking a sweat, you know? And this is also like the single player session, so it's not like there's a bunch of other players causing lag or whatever. It's literally the game just working the way it has always worked, and it's working way worse than it did with a 6-year-old card. And frankly, I don't know why that's like acceptable or whatever. That's just, I don't know. It really feels like technology shouldn't go this far back when it's supposed to be an improvement. On the other hand, for what it's worth, the Intel Arc card is fairly affordable. I got it for about 200 euros, and it also has built-in support for AV1, which is like a modern video codec, right? And AV1 is a bit more efficient than H.264 and possibly even 265, but the thing is that it's more or less an open technology that anyone can just utilize, which is amazing because that means that the adoption is going to be pretty quick. And so we're going to get videos online that take up less space and less bandwidth to download, but have good quality, even at bit rates where the older codecs like H.264 would suffer. And that's kind of a really cool thing, especially if you do streaming and recording and stuff, right? However, even that is kind of borked. I have run into situations where I'm just playing like a video on a Chromium-based browser, and the whole browser window just has this pattern on it, as if the GPU would straight up be dying, like a checkerboard almost. But it's not the whole screen, it isn't like the GPU properly dying, it's just some super weird issue with the actual rendering of the window or something. I don't know. Because every other window in the operating system is fine. I can even take the glitched out window and drag it around. And, you know, that one's gonna be glitchy for a little bit and eventually sort of fix itself. And the good news is that Intel are updating their drivers and presumably working on this stuff. The bad news is that I don't actually have a solution for this. The thing is that I need a new CPU. Like, there is no way around this, right? If I don't want stutters all the time, and if I want the GPU that I paid for to be of actual use, I need a new CPU. And that kind of sucks, because aside from this... Oh wait, what's going on? How do I steal the supplies? Eh? I don't get it. Maybe I can just blow it up? Okay, so the CPU itself is good. It's good enough for all of my development stuff and good enough for all of my gaming stuff. And I really like it. And with an overclock, even a Ryzen processor from like 5 years ago, like the first gen of Ryzen's, is good. And that's unfortunate that I'm supposed to turn it into e-waste or something. Oh, I actually can't get it out. I have to turn it into e-waste because Intel says so. And I am angry because I don't know how they managed to mess things up so badly. Where this card loses out to something that's, you know, 6 years old. At the same time, I guess they really didn't want to bother with the compatibility with the older renderers like DirectX 9, and so they kind of have a translation layer running there. But DirectX 11 shouldn't have stutters this bad, like, it isn't rocket science. Maybe they're gonna come out with some patch that fixes everything. But so far the experience isn't very good. And what is also not good is just how much struggling I had to do to get OBS working again. And this is kind of odd because I have used OBS for a while, and with AMD, the game capture, the window capture, all of those features just worked out of the box. With Arc, when I turn on game capture, for the longest time ever, I don't see the game. And so I tab back in, I tab back out, I restart the game, and sometimes it hooks into the process correctly and shows up. Other times it just doesn't. Now, I blame perhaps the latest OBS update that I installed, just thinking that it might make things more stable. But in my experience, whenever there's an update, it's just gonna break something. Unless it's like a security update, in which case you don't really get a choice. You just have to install it or live with your software all vulnerable and stuff. And if you look at the frame graph right now, it's still sometimes under 60, but it doesn't seem as stuttery. And that's another odd thing. Like, I am pretty sure it doesn't have much to do with actually loading the data from the game in, but rather stuff like shaders and other things just popping off. Because I had this experience the other day where I played... what did I play? War Thunder? Or maybe another game. A shooter of some sort. I don't remember the exact game. But like, whenever I would shoot at someone, when I was in the game for the first time that session, when the computer's on, there would be a stutter just as the shot went off. Which is pretty horrible for competitive games. But I guess just extremely annoying in every other genre of like shooter game. It might happen due to like shader compilation, but I don't know, it feels like most game engines have largely solved that issue, and it's like the whole ReBAR thing again. And that's a bit odd, right? Aside from that, what else? Oh yeah, they have a control panel. It is pretty cool. They try to opt you into their data collection thing by default, where they essentially collect what websites you visit. It's supposed to be anonymous, and I trust that it is, because collecting that sort of private information is just asking for trouble in like the European Union. But that's kind of odd, that you just want a GPU to work, and they're like, nope, listen, instead here, we're just gonna take a bunch of your data. That's kind of preposterous. I don't know, maybe that like Richard Stallman guy had a point. I don't know. Oh yeah, another thing. I had to uninstall Valorant because after the BIOS update I did in hopes of getting ReBAR working, after that update, Valorant just refuses to run. It just has an error. It's like, hey, you need to restart your computer for Valorant to run. And it doesn't, no matter how many times I restart it. Like the Vanguard thing is there, like there are sort of rootkit looking antivirus. Well, okay, not antivirus, anti-cheat. I am a dum-dum. I am very sleepy today. And I can't play the game, so I uninstalled it. Except that I could not actually uninstall it, because Windows 10, or maybe Valorant or Riot in general, are kind of slightly mean. Because the uninstall option in Windows does nothing, and I literally have to do it like the super old school way, which is where I just go into like the directory where the application is and delete that, which frees up, you know, like the majority of storage, like 30 or 40 gigs. With the problem being that as time passes on, if you try quote-unquote uninstalling software like this, the Windows registry is just gonna be a little bit of a mess, okay? And yeah, that wasn't very cool, but I have some like storage that I will be able to play more games on, just to see how bad or good Arc is. Because when I initially went into the game, it was worse than whatever you're seeing right now. The frame rate was like 20 to 40. And now it seems to at least have gotten up to 60. Now I tried messing around with their like graphics options in their control panel thing. The problem is that there's only like 3 options in total, right? One option that did seem interesting is that they have a smart VSync option. So when your frame rate is below the refresh rate of the monitor, it dynamically disables VSync, so you can at least try to get close to like 60 or whatever FPS you need. And when the actual frame rate goes above that, it enables VSync so that you don't get any like screen tearing, which in some games can be very noticeable depending on how things are done. Also, I installed the ReBAR or statistics server, which is the thing that you're actually seeing in the upper left. Maybe the text is a little bit on the tiny side, but I think I'll just kind of export the video in high quality so anyone who is curious can kind of look at things. But in general, it should be fairly apparent that nothing is maxed out, right? Nothing is being bottlenecked. It's just that the card refuses to work all that well. And like, I do have footage from playing GTA Online previously, and it was better. And right now I don't really know what I want to do. Whether I want to just kind of bite the bullet and hope that a future driver update fixes things, because I still want to give Intel a fair shot, you know? And kind of support them to avoid the market being like a monopoly or a duopoly. Because they're also working on like some machine learning stuff, and that's kind of cool. And I wish them like the best of success with that. And so I don't think I will return this card. Instead, I might just kind of get a newer CPU that actually supports ReBAR. Because I know that my motherboard does, and I know that the CPU is kind of the limiting factor here. So I would need, let's say, a Ryzen series 3000 and upwards. Yeah, so quite the update, but my motherboard with the new BIOS that I installed should have the support for that. Because, you know, still AM4 socket, I think. I really hope that's still AM4. The only problem is that I would still have to source the actual CPU, because there is no way that I'm buying one of the very sort of recent and fancy X3D chips, because those are expensive as frick. And also I probably can't go with something that has super high TDP. I still enjoy having multiple cores, because, you know, when I do render videos or do programming and stuff, it's very useful to have that sort of parallelism going on. But aside from that, I don't know. I feel like I might go for a Ryzen 5. I will have a look at benchmarks and like whatever the overclocking potential is. My only trouble is that I would probably get a used one, which would mean going to AliExpress and buying a CPU off of there. And so far my experiences with that have been good, albeit a little bit risky, you know? Because you are shipping this very sort of fragile thing with a bunch of fine pins halfway across the world. And, you know, that's tricky. Aside from that, what else? Oh yeah, actually installing the thing. My sort of computer case is very crowded right now. And I think I can probably figure all the cooler stuff out, because the cooler I have is an aftermarket one and it's actually really nice. And probably I can put everything on and apply the thermal paste correctly and not break anything in the process. It's just that I kind of don't want to, because I like my current CPU. And apparently there are some hacks that you can do with UEFI to make the ReBAR thing work, even if it doesn't work super well on the older CPUs. However, I don't actually use UEFI for booting yet. I currently have Windows 10 installed in the sort of legacy BIOS mode, meaning that the hack wouldn't really work for me. Which leaves me in an unfortunate position of being stuck with whatever this is. See, you can just see the stutters. And I am kind of torn because, honestly, I don't know. I feel like it's gonna be visible in the video very much, and it is very noticeable when I play, but is it bad enough to make me kind of, you know, rage quit and go back to Ryzen? Like my lovely Ryzen and the RX 580 that I have. Because I still have it. I still have the card sitting in a box, and I could go back to it. The only problem is that that would also mean pulling the whole card and putting the other one in, and reconnecting all of the display things. Because right now I have just a bunch of adapters, because none of my monitors actually have DisplayPort, which is what the majority of the cards have, and so I kind of need adapters for everything. And curiously, the actual adapters needed for the new card and the old card differ. The old card actually has a DVI. And that's amazing because that matches one of the monitors, which makes things easier. There's also something else. Oh, right. I have a new job. I am a software developer again, which is kind of why there haven't been like any streams and stuff going on, and why this is also just a recorded video, because I'm still working on like another thing, and you know, like a freelance thing on the side, and I'm very exhausted, and I just feel like a failure because things are harder than it seems, and you know, I kind of suck. And I feel like I have, what would you even call it, like an executive dysfunction, basically ADHD, where I have trouble doing things always like at a reasonable pace and time and amount if the deadline isn't literally looming over my head. And that's a horrible place to be in, and I have to, you know, rely on discipline because the motivation isn't there. And that does feel like a sort of mental condition that would really need some help of the medical sort. Except that that's still a very long journey, probably ahead of me. I think I can figure it out. But until then, I just sort of have to, I don't know, see the good in life, where it is. And also not sort of delude myself and just accept the things that are kind of sucky as what they are and just move on. Because like, I remember when I used to have a super old 9800 GT card, and that was around the time when Mount & Blade, like the first game, had come out, and I really liked playing it, except it would barely run. And the card itself, it was actually dying slowly, ever so slowly. Something was wrong with it thermally, where it went up to like 100 degrees. The fans were spinning, it would just heat up like a frigging lamp, okay? And what ended up happening is that there would be screen artifacts, like polygons being where they shouldn't be. It's like taking one of those retro consoles and just yoinking the cartridge and just wiggling it back and forth a little bit. And what's worse, eventually it would just freeze. And my way of fixing it was essentially a very crude form of free flow soldering, where I would take the whole GPU and put it in an oven. I don't think that would work with the Intel Arc though, as much as I'd kind of like to try right now. And yeah, that card kind of, well, it was a workhorse for a very old time, and I played a lot of GTA San Andreas with it. But it was showing its age, and at the same time it kind of was the best that I could get, which wasn't a lot because, you know, I was a broke kid. And it was still good. I saw the good there, and I'm kind of happy about that. And I replaced it with like a 650 GTX. My next card was an AMD one. There was like an RX 570, which is actually a big jump upwards. However, the 4 gigs of VRAM kind of insufficient for many like newer titles, even if it was one of those fancy overclocked cards. I guess the issue that I had a lot with that card was that the power draw was actually pretty high, like the RX 570, and I think I just picked out some bad PSUs. And what ended up happening was that the system would be unstable. It would just randomly shut down and just freeze and crash, and it was kind of scary. And then I got the RX 580, which despite being like way smaller, it was like the 2048. what do you even call them? Cores? Yeah, like the smaller version with the fewer cores. That one was still a step up. That's the one that I used before getting the Arc card. And it's kind of lovely, except many modern titles really struggle with it. And there's also the fact that even if I overclock it, the fans, you know, can't make it keep up. Especially when I'm in VR, it just sounds like an airplane and the frame rate is still low. Like in VR chat, I get around 30 to 40, which is passable for desktop. I am coping, but is absolutely horrible for VR. I can't cope there. There's just such a bad sort of slideshow effect going on in VR. When you try moving your head and it literally lags, it just gives you a headache and sort of like a freaking motion sickness vibe. Okay, where's my gun? I don't have the gun. Okay, yoink. Frick it. There we go. Oh, there's another one. Yeah, but I don't know. I still want to be happy about the Intel Arc. I haven't seen how it performs in all games. I feel like there will be stutters in everything, to some degree. Like War Thunder, the average frame rates in War Thunder are better. However, yeah, the stutters are still there. Like when I shoot the tanks and all that other stuff, and when there's like shaders going on, it does stutter a lot. I would like to do a stream like this weekend, when I will have more free time, and just kind of, you know, vibe and play games, and I don't know. I feel slightly anxious about the fact that I haven't streamed in a while, and also just the sort of old feelings of, oh hey, what do I even say? I can just make cat noises, but then like half of the video is cat noises. Like, wow. You know, I make that one a lot. Like the last edit of Nuclear Option, like that kind of cool plane game, there were a lot of cat noises because I was just goobering. And also I would like to play something with friends, but this time around I also want to find enough time to do all the work and hopefully get into a slightly better shape physically, meaning that I would probably do some jogging and keep exercising, because I'm not gonna pull off an amazing Astolfo cosplay by just eating snacks, okay? I don't think that's possible. Thick thighs are lovely, but I gotta fit into all the cosplay. I think there are things going on in my life, and I'm trying sort of like my bestest to deal with all of them. It's just that everything takes time and effort. And I do feel my mood kind of fluctuating between, okay, this will take a lot of work, I might not succeed, but I'm gonna give it a good shot. And that in of itself is good enough for me. Just trying in my earnest and you know, seeing how it turns out. Versus just feeling like, okay, trying is hard because I get the feeling that at the end of it there isn't success, and that sometimes still irks me very much. Which I feel like might be one of the reasons why I actually don't do work at appropriate times when the deadlines are far away. Because sometimes working on various projects just involves a bunch of feeling uncomfortable, right? Like if you're working with a new framework, or if you're working with like some online platform and the documentation sucks and the code generation sucks and everything along the way just gives you more and more issues, then that's kind of unfortunate, and it's not going to be pleasant no matter how you look at it. And you can treat it as a learning experience, but at some point it's not learning, at some point it's just making sort of a fool of yourself to please the programming gods, or rather just clutch together the technologies in a way that they're gonna give you a sort of satisfactory outcome. Because a lot of the things that I run into aren't even like just quirks of the technologies, they're not quirks of the frameworks, they're just bad code that I am supposed to deal with. And also sometimes when you do need external services, for example in the case of paying out, so for example you take a payment from a client for some products, but you also need to pay the actual store that you are an intermediary to, so the store can actually fulfill the order. And taking payments, easy. Just use like Stripe, use PayPal, there's like a bunch of different solutions for that. And that part's easy. But once you get to the actual payout, either you need like the PSD2 license in Europe, for which you have a whole process and a bunch of capital that you need, or alternatively you're stuck trying to find a suitable cloud provider that does that, you know, in the software as a service way. But there's a bunch of them and none of them are established because apparently the whole use case is very niche and you kind of struggle with that. And then there's just quirks along the way, like for example if you work with .NET and are working with the database in the back end and you have a singleton, sooner or later you're going to run into issues where the same DB context is reused across different threads. For example, if you have a task queue, and there's no easy solution for fixing that unless you want to rewrite the whole task queue to be fully sequential. And even if you try to make it sequential, it might not be viewed that way by the framework core. And instead of just rolling along with it or having a parameter that you can set to just be like, okay, ignore this, no, instead it's gonna fail the queries and just whatever sort of process you were in the middle of will fail. Which is especially worse if you have some like async processes where you schedule, for example, an email to be processed and sent out in a queue, as opposed to when user presses the buy button, right? And then the purchase is done but the email sending just fails, and you all of a sudden need to do additional like logic and database structure changes to log the fact that the sending failed, and then you need like a retry logic. And it's not like you can easily avoid this, you know, but it is still a little bit frustrating. And then I've even had issues with like .NET Core where I try serializing and deserializing stuff from JSON, essentially just shuffling objects to the front end and back to the back end. And the issue there is that if a required field was null, like for example I need an ID value in the back end, but in the front end that ID value is null, it doesn't even throw an error, it just makes the whole object null. Which is extremely confusing when you don't have any idea that it's even happening, because it's not like the software actually has the proper logging to tell you that. Which does feel kind of like a failure on their part. For example, in the Java ecosystem, there's a lot of things that are extremely annoying and broken. But logging, when it works, it's okay. And when it doesn't, it literally gives you like a remote code execution vulnerability, like the log4j thing that happened. But yeah, that's kind of annoying. And right now I have invested a bunch of time in writing the front end. I'm sort of bootstrapping the entire platform single-handedly. And I know that I can do it, but I'm also in like crossroads right now. Where my current problem is that, how do I even put this? Yeah, my current problem is that I want to refactor a bunch of code, but refactoring, although it might make the code easier to work with, it would break a lot of things along the way during the refactoring. And that is still not shipping features, which I should probably focus on. Because, you know, there are deadlines, there are investors, everyone needs to see a working system. And my idea is that I could just bite the bullet and deal with the system being sort of, you know, suboptimal for a while. And, you know, just kind of try to figure it out as I go along. And once the time opens up, then do the actual refactoring. The only problem is that if I structure code around sort of suboptimal structures, then that sort of coupling, that sort of structure will also take a while to get rid of. So I could also try to just write all of the new code in a way that's a bit more better and maintainable, and try to limit the fallout of the bad technical decisions that I made beforehand, which seemed good at the time, but weren't good as the requirements changed. And sometimes your hand is just forced in that direction, and it is what it is. A bit of rambling, yes, but I feel like software maintenance is just hard no matter what you do. Ideally, you'd have very decoupled modules that you can also work with individually. But that's never gonna be the case because you will always have some sort of like coupling. And unless you make all of the communication between those be in the form of passing messages, you will still have like interfaces and a bunch of code that, you know, for better or worse, relies on different bits of the same system. And even if you add like some message passing in there, sure, you have a very clear interface and you can change the internals. The problem is that the interface itself might be bad, and boom, suddenly you need to do changes across everything that actually uses the interface. So the system itself right now is mostly monolithic. You can still scale it horizontally, it's just gonna work. But I kind of feel that I lucked out in not going with microservices, but holy frick, .NET, it does a few things well and it does a lot of things really badly. Like there is this sort of thing called auto mapper, which lets you map your database entities to basically data transfer objects that you've made yourself to send data to the actual users. And the solution for automating that sort of binding or mapping is called AutoMapper. And AutoMapper is a piece of crap that doesn't work and doesn't actually, you know, do the mapping, do the one thing it's supposed to do. It doesn't scan the entities, it just gives one error after the other. And I never really figured it out. I tried a lot, but eventually I just kept putting time in and it was like a frigging black hole. It just numbed all of my time. And so in the end I just opted for writing the mappers manually. I wrote an interface for them, and also I just used large language models to fill out most of the boilerplate, do a little inspection with my eyes, and so far that is cumbersome but good enough. I feel like a lot of the actual code base is just written by LLMs because of how incredibly repetitive it is. For example, I have an order entity in the database, well, a table that maps to an entity in the backend. And the admins need to see the orders, the shoppers need to see the orders, the sellers need to see the orders, and any like delivery drivers or whoever also need to see the orders. And the thing is that the data that you show the admins, you probably don't want to show like your users because there's some internal information there. And so you either need to dynamically exclude fields, which is tricky, especially with like the decorators or annotations or whatever you call them in C#. Or you just need different objects. And different objects need different mappers. And I am back at the problem of just writing a whole bunch of code around these same entities. And I feel like changes across the system really propagate and compound. So for example, there is one database table. Okay, I can change a column in it. But then I have an entity in the backend that's mapped to this table, so that needs to be changed. Okay, that's not too bad. CodeGen can actually automate this for me. But then I have a bunch of like data transfer objects that all also need to be changed. Like perhaps multiple different views at the same database table. So then I change those. Okay, a little driveway. So I change those, but then those have corresponding mappers that also need changes. And by that time, there could also be changes that need to be done in like services or controllers. But even if we get the data to the front end, I also need changes in the front end. Like if I have some classes there, whether it's like TypeScript or even JavaScript, which is like, you know, object, any changes there. And then there's also a bunch of like front-end components and front-end services, which might also see the changes. And so to rename one freaking column, which I probably just wouldn't do because, you know, it's easier that way. So to deal with that one column, I need to put in a bunch of effort. And that's kind of unfortunate. Because imagine changing relationships between the entities or objects or whatever. All of a sudden, you have structural changes that need to propagate through like dozens of places. And that does feel untenable.
Pegasus Lifestyle Management. How can I help? Great. The aircraft is waiting for you at our nearest airfield. We trust you'll be happy, madam.
I don't know what to say. I feel like all the code that you write just kind of rots. Unless you get it extremely right, but more often than not, there will be good parts in your system and there will be parts that are less nice. And that's just sort of a part of the sort of technological churn that is there in the industry. Same way how like major framework versions tend to introduce breaking changes, and updating across framework versions sometimes just isn't realistic, right? So there are a lot of projects out there that are stuck on end-of-life versions just because no one can really, you know, do the update that's necessary, do the migration. So maybe software, like the natural state of software is it just being bad, and you need to accept that if you want positive changes, you will never have them if the system is like very strongly and deeply coupled and big. If it's small, you can just rewrite the system into something that's better, you know, as long as the system is actually like earning you money or you gain some utility from it and can actually spare the time. Or alternatively, you can just rip out individual like modules from the system and replace those one by one with something better. Whereas a huge like one-off migration, that will almost never work. The scope is going to be too big and you will be struggling with like years upon years of inherent complexity, as well as accidental complexity. Those will just kind of kick your butt. Actually, I don't know why I sound so negative or sad today. I don't feel bad about the way things are. It's just that, you know, sometimes people pretend that things aren't as bad and that if they follow, like, let's say, solid or dry principles, they're gonna be good. Whereas in actuality, if Spring Boot version updates make your whole project something that's just deprecated and won't work, well, there's nothing you can really do about it. And, you know, that's kind of a bummer. But hey, a part of life is just accepting that there are some things that you can't change. And for what it's worth, I think I should have picked a tech stack that some would regard as worse than .NET, which is just Node. I could have just written JavaScript on the back end, and the thing is that the type system, I wouldn't really have to worry about it. I could just YOLO it, and I'm pretty sure that down the road there would be very serious issues with the correctness of such a platform, but the thing is that I could get it off the ground very quickly. And if we live by a sort of utilitarian to the max type of reasoning, then that's the right thing. Just build the first prototype, no matter how bad it is, just write Node, write PHP without regard for like proper testing or whatever. You know, actually PHP is fine, like at least modern frameworks and libraries. And just, you know, do some manual testing if you need to, don't really care that much about how perfectly everything is architected, but get it working. Put it out there, see if it has like a product market fit or actually serves a good purpose. And if it picks up from there, at some point you should have enough resources to actually revisit it and use all of the lessons that you have learned to basically rework it into something better. And if it's something that earns a lot of money and is a serious thing and you feel like the code quality is really bad and you need to fix it now, then the good news is that that set of circumstances, you also should have enough money to have a bunch of people and just throw person hours at the problem until it breaks under the collective effort of everyone involved, you know?
Okay.
Well, something like that anyways. And when I was studying, no one really talked about all this utilitarian stuff. And I kind of suffered from perfectionism, which I still have to some degree. I really like going back to code and making it a bit better to work with and just nicer all around. But at the same time, if you learn to let go and not sweat the small stuff, you can be reasonably productive. And that's the sort of business sense that developers often do not have. Because they like to focus sometimes just on the code fitting their idea of what good code is, and other times having a very practical concern over how maintainable the code will be. However, in actuality, sometimes they shouldn't just be wondering about maintaining the code, but rather how easy it would be to throw it away and replace it. And the unfortunate thing is that sometimes very sort of optimized code will also be very sort of coupled and just, you know, hard to reason about and hard to replace. For example, in my API, I might need an order, and that order has deliveries, you know, just sort of generic information about from where and to where the delivery should be made. And also, those deliveries have additional delivery types. For example, you could have a courier delivery where someone drives the package to you. You could have sort of a postal delivery where it's dropped off in a postal service or something of that magnitude. And you know, it's a hierarchy. And what I could do is I could have 3 separate API calls, which should be slightly wasteful, but very easy to reason about. Like, if I need the orders, I just call the orders API and I get them. However, if I want to do it a little bit more efficiently, I can have one API endpoint that returns an expanded resource. So a big JSON object with a bunch of fields. It's one request. The network overhead is therefore lessened, like the total one. Compression will still make it reasonable in size, as long as there's not like a crazy amount of data. And on the back end though, I might need to sort of eagerly load some related entities and serialize those. And on the front end, suddenly the data access is a little bit deeper, and I actually need to check whether all of those exist along the way. So, okay, do I have an order? Okay, I have an order. Does the order have a delivery? Okay, the order has delivery. Does the delivery have a car delivery? Okay, so from the car delivery, we need this one field, but we've needed to do a bunch of checks along the way. Which isn't a very big deal, because JavaScript can do that with no issues if, you know, everything's loaded in memory. It's just that writing the code ends up being more verbose and just longer than it perhaps should be. But yeah, maybe on my part that's also premature optimization. I have been burnt really badly by the n+1 problem in the past, where, for example, you read in a list of items, and each of those items can have sub-items. And that what sorry, I can't English right now. What ends up happening is that if you have a badly written code base, you might have different services fetching the data, and you could call one service from the other service. And so you'd read in all the list from the database with one query, and then you would have one call per each of the item in the list that has related data. And that just kills the performance. In the case of .NET and Entity Framework Core, I have this really cool thing called split query, where you can sort of decide how you want the selects to be done. And if you say that, okay, I want the list of these items and their sort of related sub-items, then you can just request that the entity framework initialize all those fields for you in one or a few queries. And that's very helpful. I don't know, I thought that was kind of great. Now, what is not great is the fact that I have absolutely forgotten to, like, you know, get something to drink. So my voice is a little bit raspy. I also have hiccups, I think. Or maybe that's a burp. That's probably just a burp. I hope I don't get actual hiccups now. But yeah, I'm just kind of vibing and a little bit eepy. I might just upload this whole thing as a little ranty rant to get over the sort of mental block of needing to deal with that, you know, worry about, oh, what if my stream is bad? Well, the thing is that this isn't the most entertaining thing, but it is still me talking. It is me getting my thoughts out in the world. And just kind of vibing and also benchmarking the GPU. The good news is that the CPU and GPU are both dealing pretty well with like the encoding. And I don't know. So far so good. I can probably stream with this. I need to see how bad the stutters are, but I don't know. It might be doable. Okay, now, I think I will be just kind of wrapping up here. Thanks for listening to me ramble, I guess. And I hope I didn't say something sussy or weird. But then again, I do say a lot of weird stuff in general. Anyways, I hope you have a lovely day. Bye!